Hi guys, and welcome to yet another episode of Retro Recipe Rewind. On today's episode, we'll be jumping all the way forward to the year 1919 and making two recipes from the Italian cookbook, The Art of Eating Well. We'll be making Macaroni Napolitaine and Cake Madeline. And now, you know what time it is. It's time for some history facts. The year 1919 brought about many changes for America. President Theodore Roosevelt died suddenly in his sleep. The Versailles Treaty was signed in Paris, ending World War I and setting the stage for the League of Nations to be born. The 19th Amendment, which would eventually give women the right to vote, passed in both the House and the Senate. And it was the year enough states had ratified a bill that would soon become the 18th Amendment. The 18th Amendment would be called the Noble Experiment. This amendment was a long time in the making, but gained popularity through the temperance movement and World War I. The idea was beer distilleries were wasting valuable resources that could be sent over to the boys across the pond. Contrary to popular belief, it didn't actually ban people from drinking alcohol, but it prohibited the sale, manufacturing, and distribution of it in the U.S. Most temperance movements were run by local churches. They thought that without all the evil alcohol, that families would be happier, men wouldn't spend all their earnings on loose women, and poverty would decrease, making the world a better place. However, this noble experiment failed miserably, and from the years of 1920 to 1933, the U.S. saw a rise in organized crime, jails at their breaking point, and a loss of morality. We'll talk about another life-changing event from 1919 a little bit later. Now, on to the recipes. You will need First things first, let's get things in order. Start by chopping up 1 onion. I chose to slice instead of dicing for this recipe. Next, let's move on to the mushrooms. The recipe called for dry mushrooms, but I chose to use fresh mushrooms instead. Partially because I couldn't find dry in my local store. I used about 10 to 12 mushrooms for this recipe. However, I am curious to know if the flavor would change with dry mushrooms. So, if you happen to make this recipe and you're able to find dry mushrooms, let me know in the comment section. Now let's move on to the parsley. I used 2 different kinds, regular parsley and Italian flat leaf parsley. This gave such a wonderful taste to the dish. Once you've wiped off your cutting board, time to move on to the meat. I use salt pork, but you can use bacon as well. Cut up enough that you have about a half a cup. Next, let's work on the meat. If you can find pre-cut stew meat in your local stores, that would work just as well. I just chose to cut mine myself. Now that everything is prepared, let's get cooking. To a large skillet, add in your salt pork and cook until brown. While the pork is cooking, take this opportunity to whisk together your 4 egg yolks and your sugar. Once again, I'll be adding my sugar in 3 stages. And when it's all done, it should look like this, light and creamy. Now head back over to your pork and add in your onions, some of your parsley, a chopped clove of garlic, and finally your mushrooms. Cook everything down over about medium-low heat. While that's cooking, to a dry pan, add in your flour to toast it over medium heat. I'd never done this before, but what I can tell you is make sure to watch your flour. Constantly move it, keep it going so that it avoids burns and scorching. After all the flour is toasted, transfer it to another bowl for it to cool a bit. Once it's cool, add it into your eggs and sugar. Then add in your butter, your lemon peel and baking soda, and whisk together for about 7 to 8 minutes. Let the batter rest for a moment and go add your beef to the onions and mushrooms. At this point, add in a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, and cook it down until the meat is browned. Remember not to be too heavy-handed with the salt. The pork is already salty enough, and you'll be adding salt into the noodles later. As the meat browns, go back to your egg whites and start to whisk them, either by hand or by this really awesome whisk attachment on your mixer. I know, right now it doesn't look like much, but don't be discouraged. Keep going. It's looking so good. We're almost there. Keep beating the air into these egg whites. Keep it going until at last your egg whites look like this. Now they're ready. Now it's time for the art of folding in egg whites. Do this slowly and in steps. I added my egg whites in 3 different stages and carefully, gently folded them over so that I would not deflate any of that air that I had spent all of that time beating into them. After everything has come together, place your batter into either small cake molds or silicone molds like these. I'm using my rose molds today, hoping that they come out with a pretty rose shape on top. Because I added the baking soda, I'm making sure not to overfill the molds. I don't fill them up to the top, I only fill them about 3/4 of the way. The recipe did not state how hot your oven would have to be, so I put mine in the oven at about 350 for around 25 to 30 minutes, but completely adjust for your oven. Now that that's all squared away, time to get back to our beef and add in our can of tomatoes. San Marzanos, of course. Mix everything together and let simmer for about 35 to 40 minutes. And now let's take a look on how the present mirrors history. The year 1919 saw one of the bloodiest race riots in U.S. history. All of this was taking place during the third wave of the Spanish flu. The economy was a mess, and the ink had barely dried on the Treaty of Versailles. Through my research, I found 3 main causes for these race riots. The first, the end of the war. Now that the war was over, soldiers were returning, and many African American soldiers who had never been out of their southern homes had finally had a taste of what it was like outside of the United States and were thirsty for more. The soldiers' new talk of equal rights scared the white Southern majority, who now feared the end of Jim Crow and their ability to hold on to control of the black minority. The second reason was the Great Migration. The North saw an influx of African Americans moving to escape segregation and poverty. At the time, many companies would use these African Americans as strike breakers and would bring them in when their own employees went on strike protesting for better working conditions. This was one of the main causes behind the rhetoric, "They're only here to take my job." Finally were the sharecroppers. In many cities, sharecroppers attempted to unionize and demand better working conditions and rights. Between April and November of 1919, there were about 25 riots and mob violence, 97 lynchings, and a 3-day massacre in Elaine, Arkansas, where over 200 black men, women, and children were brutally murdered. If you think about it, we can draw parallels from then to today. Time to finish off the recipe. Once your pasta is boiled, strain it and place it into a bowl. Please do not rinse off your pasta. It changes the texture and the taste. Then take a generous spoonful of sauce and place it onto the noodles. And to top it all off, finish with a healthy sprinkling of Parmesan cheese. Lastly, plate up those beautiful little Madeline cakes. I was super excited when the rose pattern came out. Time to taste test. My first bite of the pasta, what could I say? It was everything that I love. Cheese and meat and noodles and sauce all rolled into one. It was delicious. I will definitely be making this again, and I recommend that everybody else make it. It is super good and easy to make. Now it's time for the Madeleines, and I can't even begin to describe the soft richness of these little cakes. These are not your Starbucks Madeleines. They were so good I had to invoke my happy dance again. Light and airy with just the right amount of crisp. When making these, I would try some different extracts with them. I put a little bit of lemon peel in here, but I'm sure that they would hold up with any other extract flavor. Hi guys, and thank you so much for watching yet another episode of Retro Recipe Rewind. Every week we'll be investigating a different cookbook to find out what were people really eating back in the past. Make sure to follow me on all my social media. Links will be in the description below. On my Instagram, we're going to be doing some behind the scenes, some polls to find out what you want to see, and in the future, some giveaways. So be sure to stay tuned for all of that. Remember, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and even share with family and friends if you enjoyed what you saw. Be sure to leave me some comments in the comments section. And if you just so happen to make a recipe from one of the episodes, send it to me via email and I'll feature you at the end of one of the episodes. Until next time, signing off for Retro Recipe Rewind.